goes out, gets ulted back. Nice shot with the backline. Will they get him? It's so close. I've with a flash forward, and Faker gets with the auto. Doesn't even need an action. Auto attack to land so well, and Clear Left now isolated. 1 versus 4. He is going to fall as well. Bang on a rampage. 7-6 in kills. SKT look to do it again.
Hello everybody and welcome to Worlds Tonight. This is going to be a special edition of Worlds Tonight with myself, Deficio and Papasmithy, to talk about Worlds Top 20, a retrospective look back at the list that we made before the play-in stage. Just if anyone's going to be watching this on YouTube or on VOD, this is right after the group stage has completed. So we'll pull up the standings, show exactly where we are sitting right now as far as the overall state of the tournament. SK Telecom and Cloud9 made it through today. Longzhu Fnatic, Team WE, Misfits Gaming, Royal Never Give Up, and Samsung, all the teams to advance through. All things considered, pretty good group stage. Deficio?
I think a lot of very exciting games, fantastic upsets, great stories as well with some surprise teams and players, I think, and obviously a few guys where you expected more, but in general I think it's been a very positive group stage.
And of course, top 20 is all about superlatives. Best at this, best at that. It was probably the best group stage Worlds we ever had, right? There was drama right to the last, so many tiebreaker games. This was an insane Worlds.
Yeah, it's been awesome so far, and as far as the list is concerned, if we retouch on the list, when we talked about the list, we set a criteria for what we were trying to predict. We were trying to say, who do we think the top 20 players at Worlds are going to be based on the available information?
And also, of course, we had to factor in the performance during Summer Split, past performances during international tournaments. So there are certain names that I think would go higher if the only criteria were how well will they perform during Worlds itself, but there were more factors we had to consider.
And as Jatt said, it was a predictive list. There were still going to be personal biases, personal things that each of us individually rated as more important to predict performance. It's not going to be about, let's show you what the new list would be now. It's very much about, let's think about the process, how we got there, what expectations we used, and then reevaluate it based on what actually happened.
Yeah, and I think the biggest expectation that we had that would have needed to be tweaked if we knew what we know now is how huge 80 carries were going to be on this list. We had 6 80 carries on this list, which was a lot, but we probably needed even more. With everyone going Ardent Sensor, with the meta revolving around early push or dive bottom lane, we didn't necessarily think it was going to be all Ardent Sensor, and that increases the importance of 80 carries.
Exactly. We did expect some teams to try and counter Ardent Sensor by playing more playmaking supports. We've barely seen that, which also means that certain supports on our list are too high, considering the impact they have in the game as a Lulu or Janna. And obviously you look at also certain 80 carries that have become the big superstar carries in this meta specifically, could easily have gone up a few ranks.
And the Ardent Sensor item and potential for it to be very strong, I think, was there to a degree, but it wasn't codified by the end of the regular season, even by the end of the playoff games. You know, for example, in Korea, we only really got extensive use of it right towards the tail end of the regional qualifier. We had KT Rolster trying to qualify against Samsung. I saw Samsung bring out this heal barrier, very defensive setup, frustrate KT, and that's where I was like, I wonder if. But it's all about wonderment. We had so many other data points that you weren't set on that being the meta coming into the tournament.
Exactly. The biggest fake out for me was just watching the LPL, because they were the first ones to adapt to heal barrier bottom lane, so to speak. They were doing it before playoffs. They were doing it months before the World Championship, and then they went away from it during the playoffs. And then we saw Longzhu win without it, and then we saw the NA playoffs and the EU playoffs, and it wasn't pivotal in the meta because it was just as strong, if not stronger, on some of those earlier patches, but things settled down towards Worlds when everyone starts scrimming each other.
And we get a lot of questions about, like, why is it that everyone just opts into the same style? Why don't someone try and counter it? And the very quick explanation is that when you play against a team with Ardent Sensor, if you don't have an Ardent Sensor yourself, in the late game you are in a disadvantage. And most teams do not trust in their ability to cleanly close out games. So they end up going into Ardent Sensor themselves, and if they want to find early aggression, they find it from other roles. The jungle, maybe the top lane, is where we see the focus go.
And the other small point is also when you get the item, when it's instantly complete, the fact that the on-hit heal doesn't scale means that instantly your AD carry is already attacking faster because of the Ardent Sensor, is healing up faster, so you can just dive in there, take a strong trade, and you get back to full health, whereas the enemy doesn't have that sort of healing.
I do like, though, that we saw Misfits try and counter it a little bit, because while the Ardent Sensor item Power Spike is fantastic, if you can shut it down beforehand because it's a Lulu or Janna with things like a Blitzcrank, you're going to get the item advantage yourself, and you can use that to really snowball the game. But again, it's a big risk. You gotta respect the Power Spike and then respect the late game.
Yeah, let's double back to the list a little bit here, though, because we had a lot of AD carries pretty high on the list that did perform. Thinking back to it, we had Prey all the way at number 2, but then the next AD carry we actually had on this list, I believe, was Mystic at 11, Bang at 12, Uzi at 14. So those guys, I think, definitely move up based on some of the performances we have seen, but even just thinking about the way the meta actually ended up being.
Exactly, and I want to go straight to Uzi, who I think was really hard to place on our lists because of what happened during his own summer split, where he didn't play a lot of games, and he even had games in playoffs where he would have great laning phase into really poor team fighting, bad positioning. During this tournament with Ardent Sensor and RNG just playing around him, like, judging from the group stage, he should be way higher on the list.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with Uzi is he was lower on the list, but everyone who knew about him was always going to be scared about Uzi. I ended up putting him at 14, you had him at 16 Deficio, and you had him at 18 Papasmithy, and it's all about how much you were willing to almost bet on the fact that he was going to be that big-time player on this stage.
And my struggle is, if I was told categorically, this is going to be the meta, someone came from the future and told me, definitely Ardent Sensor, I'd want to put him higher. But I think, some people, if we were doing a list right now, Uzi's probably top 5 for performance at Worlds, right?
Or very close to it.
Exactly. He's very much up there. But when it comes to what do I think will happen in the future, when it comes to the fact that he did not play much in summer, he would be higher. But I think actually using those predictive elements over something like how he actually performed over the course of the year is such a risk, because we're sitting at the end of week 2. The meta for sure hasn't codified. We still don't know 100% what the finals meta will be. We've seen Caitlyn come in as a Johnny-come-lately thing. We've seen other things tried. As you say, Misfits once. G2 failed with it earlier in the tournament. We don't know for sure, but right now it looks comical having him so low. But we didn't have complete information. He's on the list. He's certainly going to have a big Worlds.
Also, RNG are playing better than expected. Like, they're playing much smarter. They're not actually just all-inning bad team fights where suddenly Uzi ends up getting caught out. It's actually very calculated, which really allows this guy to use his fantastic mechanics in the late game.
Yeah, I think Mystic moves up a lot as well, like both of those LPL AD carries. Even if I based it off of how they played in group stage, iBoy on that 2 and 4 team would probably crack the list at some point, even towards the bottom, after he played like 2 regular season games at the very end and then jumped in there.
I would not put iBoy in my top 20, even after what I've seen now.
If you were making one like right now.
If I was making a list right now, I would not put iBoy top 20. I think he's a product of a meta that benefits him more than maybe expected. And then, of course, the last few games he just played here in week 2 where he really stood out. Because week 1, he was good, but he wasn't a standout. He wasn't a top 20 player.
I don't know if I agree. I think he was their best player in the losses now. They went 0-3, so it's hard to
really...
No
top 20 players.
Exactly, that's fair. But given how much he showed today, I would have been wrestling with him. Honestly, one of the things I wrestled with just making this list, and let's go back to what I was mentioning about, hey, what if I knew it was going to be Ardent Sensor meta? There was weeks there, when I was considering what I would do with this list, where I thought, is Prey number 1? I really did heavily consider, is Prey number 1? And that probably sounds comical to people. Faker is certainly the best player of all time. But when it came to who will be the best performing player at Worlds 2017, when it came to season data, fantastic summer season, best player in spring season, if I had that final element telling me, hey, the AD carry is the most important role going into the tournament, I feel like he's the best AD carry here measurably, and that's always going to get into a bit of pseudoscience, but at least it feels like he really has stepped up. Would I have gone back and done it? I'm not 100% sure, but it would have been an even closer race.
Yeah, for what it's worth, you had Prey higher than either Deficio or
I had him at number 2.
Number 2, Deficio, and I had him at number 3. And I think a lot of AD carries are in that discussion for the most impactful player on their team. And based on group stage performance, if you take the reputation out of it, Faker's not number 1 after this week. He might even not crack top 5 without his reputation. But he still has that, and there's still that outside chance he makes a world championship. So it's really interesting thinking back about that list. But would I put Faker number 1 again? Even in the Ardent Sensor meta coming into Worlds? Probably, if I had to make that choice.
So we're talking about, of course, all the big names, especially from the LPL and even LCK as well. I want to move it over to more the Western AD carries, because there was a lot of
Yeah.
debate, obviously, regarding double lift versus reckless.
That was a
versus-
big one.
Again, also Sven being fairly high on our list. And the whole double lift versus reckless, judging from the group stages we have seen, I think reckless should be in the top 20. He's
Agree.
He's been a standout carry for these guys, and sure, outside of the one misplay he had against Immortals, it's been really, really good. And Fnatic have, of course, relied a lot on him also in this meta. Without it being just go to late game and just wait for him, it's actually been very proactive on his own, which has been something that we haven't seen from every AD carry.
Yeah, and that's the thing, right? When Fnatic was winning, Reckless was needing to smash, and when TSM tried to play around double lift in the bottom lane, take turret strategies, Lulu Trist, they were not able to execute that strategy. Yes, it does have to do a little bit with your team, but he wasn't flashing in team fights at the right places, he wasn't maximizing his damage, and Reckless had that one giant mistake that cost them a game for sure. But other than that, he was pretty stellar, and that still puts him above double lift.
And at the end of the day, it was almost part and parcel of the TSM strength prediction that the icing on the cake for TSM would be double lift also stepping up. When the meta was codified, when the meta was settled to be Ardent Sensor, it wasn't like having double lift on the team wasn't supposed to be anything but a benefit, because he has been such a standout AD carrier for basically the entire history of League of Legends. But I think to your point, Deficio, neither of us, none of the three of us will disagree that Reckless outperformed double lift. We had him at 20, and notably 21 was Reckless. So
Yeah.
he was the closest there. But at the end, the decision is easy now.
And I think, like, thinking back to my list where I had Reckless number 20, I'd probably move him up a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily put him, like, close to a top 10 already, but I would definitely move him up a few spots, take over someone like Sword Art potentially on my list as well, and get him a bit higher.
Yeah, also, as long as we're on the topic of the Western players in this list, we had Bjergsen at number 10, the highest ranked player from NA or EU. Regrets, thoughts after this one played out?
I mean, you guys obviously have even more regrets than I, because you go back and you listen to the audio of his position in 2016. It was very much he needs to show something this tournament, otherwise we have to kind of change the way we look at Bjergsen. Then we come to this tournament, different panel. I sub in for Spawn, but we were kind of in the same spot, but more confident of Bjergsen given what had happened in North America in 2017. And now you sit here and you say, like, Bjergsen was not a top 20 player at this tournament. There's no way you could kind of come to that decision, I think. And it's kind of weird, because theoretically these talks will have to happen again next year. And what can Bjergsen show in between those two times to really raise expectation once more?
So I think he can still be a top 20 player. I don't think he's 10. He's definitely not 10 based off what he saw, but he was playing low risk League of Legends with small CS leads and solid team fighting. It's hard to get on the top 20 list like that unless your team is finding a lot of success. But there's a lot of other mid laners, even on this list, that with better teams playing a very similar style, found a lot of success, because there are, there's the scouts that were getting solo kills, but then that high risk play style
don't worry.
also had a bunch of solo deaths and some terrible team fighting. So there's that middle ground, and he was playing too safe to me to be a top 10 player, and the success obviously did not follow. But it's going to be really interesting thinking about where he goes next year.
I think we should also raise, the person he was most directly compared to in his region, in Jensen, of course, when it came to the MVP award of the summer season. This was something we talked about. We talked about, you guys, I guess, talked about, was the comparison between the two. And to me, Jensen had a more impressive tournament, even if the most recent games today weren't as kind of dynamic as what he showed earlier.
Yeah, definitely a great impact overall from Jensen specifically, and a guy who can for sure crack into the top 20 as well with his performance. But on the Bjergsen point, the really hard thing is, I think Bjergsen's performance, the problems around it is mainly a product of the problems of TSM as a team. I think when you have a setup where your early game is so bad, despite it not being Bjergsen losing his lane, but the way you're playing with your jungler is a very passive style. Your bot lane is not necessarily taking over lanes either. You're drafting very scaling comps. I think it's really hard for a guy like Bjergsen to be more aggressive. Like, C9 are drafting consistently strong early game junglers. They invest time around Jensen to make him play more aggressive, and he's obviously using it extremely well. I'm not seeing the same from TSM, so I think people are flaming Bjergsen way too much. I think he overall had a fine tournament where, of course, as a leader, as a shot caller, we should ask for more. Do we want him to be more aggressive? Yes. Can you be more aggressive when you're playing a very defensive style as a team? I don't think so. So top 10, no. But definitely on my top 20 list, even after group stages.
And that's the thing. Bjergsen didn't put himself at 10.
We did.
We did, right?
Sure.
And when we talk about Jensen, that guy, because of his playoffs performance and because he did have to qualify via the regional qualifier, it didn't seem that that would necessarily play through. But based on how C9 continues to play around Jensen in this super 80 carry focus meta, yes, Sneaky's still playing at a pretty high level, but they continue to play through that mid lane. And they're a team that still made the quarterfinals. I think emphatically actually would have put Jensen on this list based on that performance.
Yep.
And it was a lot about this is how C9 play or perceived to play from the footage you've seen. Will that work at Worlds in a group with Faker, in a hard group? I think the easy answer was probably not. It did look like it was going to be one note. But just to come back to Bjergsen, I think saying he's not a top 20 player at Worlds isn't necessarily flame. Like, I do, for one, see this guy's...
I didn't mean you. I mean more the community.
Sure. I understand the community has their one-note responses, but at the end of the day, like, he has been on this team a long time. He is a leadership voice. When we're looking at the tournament, we're thinking about how a player will function in the context of their team, in the context of the group. I think at the end of the day, to leave everything kind of at his feet and just ignore the fact that this is a consistent trend, it does irk me a little bit, because I think he's a fantastic player, a wonderful player, maybe the best Western player of all time. But his position on the list has to continue to get more and more tenuous as this becomes kind of a one-note story.
Yeah, and that's why, again, I think we all agree that top 10 is too high. We obviously had a lot of expectations regarding TSM and their performance in what looked like a fairly easy group on paper. And if there is this world where TSM is doing really well, you know, a guy like Bjergsen probably suddenly looks much better, even as a top 10 player. But yeah, I think in general, move him down some ranks. He's still a fantastic individual player, and I would love to see him with a different kind of setup that actually focused more on playing aggressive, especially with Bjergsen specifically, because I think he still has the mechanics to do that.
Right, refocus on the 2014 TSM type of style where they're getting him going. A lot of people talked about Bjergsen versus Jensen during the regular season. A lot of our discourse during the making of this list was actually Perks versus Scout. Mid laners from absolutely different regions. Neither of these guys ended up advancing into the quarterfinal stage, but I'll let you guys start. Who do you want to talk about, Scout or Perks? We're going to end up probably talking about these guys.
It's a leading question here, Deficio.
Scout.
Okay, what do you think about Scout?
I
had him at 11.
Yes.
You guys had him at like 22 or 23, which averaged him as the 19th player on our list.
I think we had him further down, actually.
No, 23. Both of us had him at 23.
Okay. I think Scout, because of your very high ranking on your list, came in overhyped. And I think the performance he showed during this tournament, especially in week 1, did not put him anywhere near a top 20 list. I think his early game, great. Strong laning phase, good mechanics. Decision making, horrible from him. Late game team fights, tunnel vision issues, unable to actually use the resources he got in the early game to carry his team, and that simply means he's not a top 20 player.
And I completely agree with you. There's counters, right? He is really good in the early game. Clearly, this guy is very skilled, but when you have big, obvious flaws, which were on full display in the LPL, full display in week 1 especially, you have to have insane highs to be a consensus top 20 player, in my opinion. I feel like if you can make a decision-making mistake like Scout, like Reckless did in the first week, you damn better well be carrying hard in other games. Scout had a much better day today. This definitely would have been a different discussion if it was recorded at the end of last week when he was really struggling.
I don't think so, because today they played more around the bottom lane, and I think that's why it actually looked better for Scout.
He was pretty good at Galio.
He had a really solid
Sure.
Galio game. He had a good LeBlanc game against Faker for most of it before it ended, right? And I thought his highs were insane. His lows were just way worse than I even expected, right? I know they were on full display during the LPL, but I did not expect the Rupture magnet that we saw in week 1 that ended up costing them 2 games. If he could dodge Rupture, this team would be in the quarterfinals. Flat out.
It's true.
Full stop. Because this dude solo killed multiple different mid laners during this tournament with jungle help, beat Faker in lane twice. Obviously, you're drafting into good matchups, but you have to be an extremely high-level player to do that. With that being said, I think based off of how low the lows were and how devastating that was, I would definitely not have him ranked at 11 again. I would definitely put him on the list still in the top 20.
I think what hurts me the most personally is the fact that he gets on this list here, obviously very highly rated by you specifically, and then a Perks is not on the list. Because I think Perks during 2017 internationally have had great performances, been consistently very good in the laning phase, done well in team fights. Very few of the mistakes we saw from Perkz in 2016 during his rookie year. And I think even during this group stage here, many of the games he was ahead. He was actually a big force to be reckoned with, but sadly for G2, they can't make it out of groups.
Contrast that with Bjergsen then, because I saw Perkz actually do a lot of things similar to Bjergsen, but based on the expectations coming in, you know, a lot of people were flaming Bjergsen. Do you think they're basically the same player at the World Championship here?
I think, talking about 2017, I think Perkz have had individually a better year than Bjergsen. I think Perkz is more willing to take certain risks in his gameplay that actually paid off quite often, where he would end up getting, you know, additional summoner spells, maybe a kill for his team. Overall, I think they are very close to each other, 100%, but I would give 2017 individually to Perkz.
And it's worth noting that it did feel like a Scout or Perkz argument, given how close Scout was to falling off the list, and specifically Perkz was to being on the list. He was on both your and I's list. That's Perkz.
Yeah.
But Scout was not. And to me, the takeaway is that I feel like Perkz last year did have critical errors, right? There were kind of Scout-like moments for Perkz a lot in 2016. But 2017, it felt like he oscillated between, say, a 6 and a 9 in terms of his performance. He had many 6 games. He had quite a few great games as well. That's where I kind of draw the line, is a player that can be 3 or 10, which I feel like Scout honestly is day to day, should largely, when it comes to a top 20 predictive list, because we're not going back and saying who was better, Bjergsen or Perkz. We're very much saying, like, let's think about our logic and then have a few more data points. What should we have considered? I really do see the value in the consistency of Perkz, and that's why, to me, he would have edged ahead of Scout.
Okay. Deficio had him 18, 19. I had him at 26 coming into the tournament, so he averaged just in our honorable mention phase pretty much around where Reckless was. It's tough, right? I think after seeing his performance, I would hedge him up a little bit, and that probably puts him in right at number 20. I still don't see the same type of like killer instinct or always ahead that you're kind of saying has happened. We definitely should have checked the stats beforehand to see whether his CSD.
Trust me.
There, just trust Deficio. He was smashing, because I still see that team being shockingly paralleled to TSM with a little bit better of an early game and a little bit more of a plan. You look at their group stages at MSI, they both won 4 and 6. Then they won the tiebreaker. Group stages here, 3 and 3 on both sides, not being able to beat the Korean teams. Like, they were very close, but the expectations were much different for those players. So I want to hold Perkz to the same standards as the top tier mid laners and make him win the game rather than just being there to move him up in the list in some of those ways.
Yeah, I definitely think he had games where he was the main carry, and it wasn't about Sven only. Generally, just like looking at the list, I think just for me, like, a regret is obviously, again, putting, based on what we've seen here during groups,
right,
having Bjergsen so high and then Perkz 8 ranks on my list further down, or 7 ranks, because I think I have Bjergsen at 11. I think those two guys needed to be much closer in my personal top 20.
Yeah, and one name we actually haven't talked about that much is Sword Art. He's at 17, the Flash Wolf support. They went 1 and 5, and many supports we actually would end up moving down a little bit on this list. Let's talk about that for a bit.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I saw, or maybe I aspired to, but I definitely saw it being much less of Ardent Sensor focused, disengage focused, Enchanter support meta. I saw the Blitzcrank games. I saw the initiation games on Thresh and Alistair. I think you and I, Martin, talked about there should be a way to make Ardent Sensor maybe the best Ardent Sensor users on the ban list and then free up the pool. But that really hasn't been the story consistently at this tournament. So a lot of these supports who have largely been off playmaking, which to me does rise, when you can impact your own lane and also roam, even on some champions that in lane aren't fantastic. Alistair, you make the aggressive flash pull, maybe you win lane. If you don't, we'll just get pushed in. We didn't see the roaming so much, so it did feel like some of these supports really, realistically, with that extra information, we talked about how AD carries would have been moved up. I felt like the support role has been minimized, at least to a point, at Worlds 2017.
And it makes me sad with a team like Flash Wolves, where you have Sword Art, who played such a fantastic summer split. He can play the big playmakers. You opt into the exact same style every other team is playing, ignoring your own weaknesses as a team. Because the late game from Flash Wolves, it's not great. It's not been great for 2 years, basically. You're relying now on Betty as your main carry, instead of Mabel, Cast, or Sword Art, which has been the trio on the international stage who's done well, and Mabel had a good tournament. Like, I understand Ardent Sensor, it's the way to play the game right now, but I feel like Flash Wolves, who ended up 1-5, at least one of the games I wanted to see a change. Give me that Alistar, give me that Blitzcrank, play around an aggressive early game where you're trying to get the bot lane rolling into camping mid lane right after which you support, and I think you might have a better chance of actually doing something, and that would have justified Sword Art's position if he did it really well. Based on him playing these Lulu Jannas, he should not be this high.
And I want to talk about a support that was even higher. You know, at rank number 9, we had Mako, who I think came in very, very highly prized. And I feel like the meta actually influenced multiple picks here in terms of Mako, because I think one of the reasons that Scout had such a great year was that Mako was the quintessential, do very well in his own lane, roam to mid, and paper over some of the weaknesses Scout showed in terms of understanding of playing around vision. There wasn't a lot of vision in a lot of those games. Clearlove wasn't getting aggressive wards down, so no one was getting aggressive wards down because there wasn't an Alistar, a Tahm Kench, a melee support to put down the vision. So I think the fact that Mako was kind of cooped up in lane, sure, iBoy is a great AD carry and in the late game, but in the early to mid game, what they lost in terms of being able to play around Scout because of the shift in the support meta actually did influence more than just that.
Yeah, and one thing that we talk about, the regrets, what do you feel good about in this list? Like, for the most part, you look at the top of it, Faker, Prey, Gorilla, Khan, Xiaohu, BDD, Wolf. We have 4 Longzhu players in the top 6.
What about the order, though?
It's going to be the right call.
The order here is really interesting because...
I think Prey moves up.
Sure.
I think BDD also moves above Khan, based on what I saw.
Yeah, I would say, based on the fact that it's not been Khan on just like Camp Khan every single game style, it's been much more about Prey specifically, and even I actually feel like BDD has been more of a focus. I agree on having BDD above. I still think for playoffs, or so here for the bracket stage, we're going to see more focus on Khan once again, and he will prove why he's high on the list.
We make a new list. I don't know if we have 4 Longzhu players in the top 6, because Gorilla, with how the meta went from Engage, which is his biggest strength, into Enchanter, which he's good at but doesn't have the same level, maybe he does actually fall down a little bit. I don't necessarily have the ready-made replacement. To me, Wolf has been very impressive on both sides, and he is probably the best Enchanter support in the world. But we have to again remember, you make the list right now, BDD's above Khan, but with the data we had available, to me, the thing this tournament told me was we had BDD really high, but I still did not know how good is BDD. I don't think the world still knows how good is he individually because of how strong the unit is. And he's impressed me solo. He's impressed me as an individual at this tournament. It makes me feel better about him being ranked 6, but it does make me have more questions to really know for sure where he is on the continuum.
Yeah, and another mid laner right next to him is Xiaohu on our list, obviously, who we have very, very high because of his MVP performance in the LPL. Because it's been more about Uzi as well with RNG, Xiaohu has been actually very good, but he's not been the guy who's been dominating every single game, and we kind of going like, this is why he's on the top 5. I think moving him down a few ranks because of the meta is perfectly fair, even though I don't think he's actually playing poorly at all.
He's still been that star player, and he's making a lot of the initiation plays, and he's giving them a lot of early game advantages that is allowing them to transition to the bottom lane to make Uzi better. So, like, that is a team that is poised right now to succeed in this meta in one of the biggest ways. And would Xiaohu be number 5? I think some AD carries would surpass him based on how important it is, how much more important it is to have a strong AD carry in this meta, but I don't feel bad about that placement retrospectively.
I mean, Xiaohu was this guy who we said, he had 4 AD carries this year. The meta shifted this year. A lot of musical chairs were played around Xiaohu. We don't see him as the focal point of them in groups, but he hasn't really put a foot wrong either. So I still feel good about him being very high because he certainly hasn't done anything to argue his case down. He has been very good.
Yeah, and I'm also very glad, again, you mentioned Wolf, that we had him very highly. There's a lot of questions regarding that because people were saying he didn't have a great summer split, and obviously there were some issues for him, but he's performing at a high level. I think having Condi on the list as well was very well deserved based on the performance and the fact we had Mystic so high. You mentioned maybe even putting him higher. Again, I'm very happy we had these 2 WE players on our top 20 because they have been very, very good.
All right, happy about a lot of the Longzhu choices. A little bit sad about having Scout at 11 personally. I know you guys are a little bit sad about Sword Art. We're still undecided about Perks, I feel like, whether or not he should be off there. That'll be a continuing conversation. Moving forward, going into the quarterfinals right here, right? How is it, like, what have we not seen? I know last year when we were thinking about the finals, we're like, man, this top 20 would literally just be all of the Samsung and Rocks and SKT players. Do we feel like it's going to go the same way because team play could reign supreme, or is this going to be a different kind of year?
It's a really big question. There's a lot of really things to juggle here. It's the sort of list that I look at right now, and I can feel good about it. There aren't many players here apart from the TSM members who, obviously underperformed in terms of the team's performance, where they look a bit silly. But I think everyone else is... The order, could it change? Yes. The meta changed things as well. The list largely does reflect things. I think moving forward, with how the meta is changing so quickly, like, is Caitlyn now permaban status in the quarterfinal? Does that affect what we see from AD carries if people have to go like, wait, Ashe is pretty good against Caitlyn. Do we just run Ashe into it? Then suddenly it feels like we're back to spring meta, and then we have utility AD carries until someone rolls the dice on a Twitch. We don't know where the juggling balls are going to finally lie.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting to kind of speculate because we've had kind of different information every day and no overall consensus.
Yeah, definitely today and more in week 2, it was a much more pressure-focused game, whether you're picking dominant laners and trying to get the turret snowball going. In those games, I feel like junglers do become fairly important. We didn't have many junglers on this list. We had 2 of them in the top 20, but they can make a big difference. Maxlor is someone who made a huge difference. Condi, we mentioned, was justified. Those are the guys that can really swing the early game massively and start that snowball.
I think Blank goes into my top 20 list based on what I expect for playoffs.
After 2 games.
What I expect for playoffs. I think Blank will be extremely important for SKT, adding a lot more consistency to the early game. I think he's going to have good performances as well. And SKT right now are looking at a bracket where it's RNG that's really the only team who should be able to challenge. Like, they're playing Misfits first. And while Maxwell had a great tournament, I think Blank's impact should be higher.
I know, I feel like on some of the picks that just missed out, I feel like Karso was probably the highest next jungler and obviously didn't have a great tournament. I know that it's not necessarily for the top 20, but if I had a player to watch, someone who is kind of like the litmus test for how a team will go, to me it's MLXG. Like, he was far away from the top 20, but he's had a great tournament compared to expectations about his bravado, his crazy style, his pathing.
Yeah.
I think we've seen some of that. We've also seen him surprisingly adept at playing very standard, very smart, even helping in defensive plays. So is he going to make top 20? I don't think so, but if RNG go far, which they very well could, his name is going to be said a lot.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of people like, yeah, he could totally be top 20. When you're making this list, it is so hard to actually crack down on those top 20.
We didn't even have play-ins to look at.
But I agree that MLXG has been awesome this tournament and is so fun to watch. And we actually have a moment now that I feel like we're mostly done recapping on top 20 to talk about the quarterfinal matchups very briefly. We saw the draw. The possibility of the SKT Longzhu final is there. I know, Papasmithy, you were very sad to see Samsung versus Longzhu on the bottom right of the bracket. We can see it right here. Team W up against Cloud9. Royal Never Give Up against Fnatic. SK Telecom versus Misfits Gaming. But first up on that Thursday is going to be Longzhu versus Samsung.
I have pause, guys. I have pause because Longzhu Gaming, I love watching them play. They're a very good team. Samsung Galaxy, they're kind of all over the place in terms of what to expect from them. They seem to have finally settled on ambition. This is the sort of series that could really go all 5 games. If it was SKT versus Samsung, even what I've seen today, it feels like stylistically SKT will be fine. Longzhu versus Samsung, that could be a 5-game series.
I understand your concerns, but the fact that it's a very short week, there's not a lot of days for Samsung to work on a lot of the issues. I think Ruler is underperforming in the current meta as well. Like, I look at Longzhu as the favorites for this one. I actually expect him to go and take like a 3-1 win over them. I think Longzhu's shot calling has been amazing. I think their late game team fighting is fantastic. They do not just rely on getting Khan ahead up in the top lane. They're actually relying so much on Prey. And I think that's going to give them the upper hand against what I still consider a fairly... Not well for Samsung standards, a fairly weak Samsung.
Yeah, I mean, they had a very weak group stage. I look at that Team WE C9 bracket up at the top. Bless C9 for actually making it out, for beating AHQ today. There's at least one North American team. And this is the game for them to check themselves against TSM, the long-standing C9 versus TSM rivalry. If they beat them, then they're definitively, even more so, undisputably a better international performer than TSM, and they could actually make the semifinals. I think it's winnable, but I give WE like a 65-35 in that matchup.
Isn't it amazing that of the 3 teams that got in via play-ins, So 4 teams that got in via play-ins. 3 teams actually made it to the quarterfinals. So that's kind of WE versus C9 is a play-ins match. That is teams from the play-ins. So it's very interesting that it's gotten to this point. But WE, I definitely had my concerns watching them in the play-ins. It felt like some of their drafts were creative to a point of perhaps being exploitable. And I thought, is this the team here? But their ramp up in the second week makes them kind of a monster, really, lurking in the quarterfinals.
Quick shot, or sorry, not quick shot. Deficio, Europe question.
Yeah.
We got 2 of them on the same side of the bracket. What do you think their chances are? Misfits versus SKT, Fnatic versus RNG. Real quick.
I think Misfits can win the early games against SKT. I don't think they're going to win the late games. Sadly for them, they have to be very
Story
clean.
about a lot of teams who play SKT.
Exactly. And I think with Fnatic, like, Uzi versus Reckless is going to be amazing. I think those games will be very explosive, and I would not be surprised to see Fnatic at least grab a game up there, maybe even 2, because while RNG look fantastic at the moment, Fnatic will bring a lot of individual star power to try and rival what RNG are doing. And again, the 80 carry match should be a lot of fun.
I'm looking forward to the quarterfinals. I think after this great group stage, we could actually have very dynamic quarterfinals. That's the hope. Don't want to jinx it. Thank you very much for everyone joining us here on Worlds tonight. That'll do it for our Top 20 episode, and quarterfinals start in Guangzhou. We're going to see you there.
Historically speaking, NA has always done well week 1, but not so well week 2. Good thing for us in Cloud9 is we're heading into week 3 because we played in the play-ins, so we have nothing to worry about.
Smoothie can interrupt it, does so. The monsoon, but the double dunk. The bottom lane is around, but look at the mini-map. There's support coming down. Great little bramble smash comes down, and Contracts bashes to safety, forced to use the collateral damage to get even further away. Contracts takes down Mouse, but look at Cloud9, they're low. There's one in reply. Impact's down. Edwin Gaming keeps their hopes at playoffs alive.
I mean, surely it can happen a third time, right, guys? I mean, right?
Bang continues to get zoned away by Mountain, while Hoonie and Faker get shut down inside the Cataclysm. Faker's gonna have enough time to rip walk one last time. AHQ, they're not being challenged. SKT, they can't stop them. AHQ are onto the inhibitor. They turn for the kills, trying to get 1 or 2 more. And AHQ strike down SKT. iBoy sidesteps and look at that. iBoy's got himself 2 already. The engage from Mouse's Zip goes down to Scout. Edward Gaming want to make playoffs with Wuhan on their backs.
Here comes Fizz, he's gonna be in range of the Shark. It's gonna land, he's gonna chomp down, and Meowkai is dead. Spooney's gonna win the game outright, he's onto the Nexus already. Cloud9 have blocked the macro management. The number 1 seed for Central Television Q1 has been secured.
Guys, I mean, right?
Okay. Nice, son. Good touch. Nice.
And now 3 versus 5. They can only sit back and watch as their exit is complete. Cloud9 improved to 3-3, and they are now SKT's biggest fans.
Outside of not picking Lucian, how are you guys going to beat SKT?
Mooney is going to drop, but he's not going to find the trade kill. Got a bit close, but iBoy getting his first kill of the game. But 2 kills for SKT. Looking for the 3rd. Clear Love is clearly going down. A double kill for Bay. Bang goes out, gets ulted back. Nice shot from the backline. Will they get him? It's so close. iBoy the flash.